The oil lamp flickered in the summer darkness, casting dancing shadows across the rough wooden walls of the cabin. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant rain. Inside, the air hung thick and still heavy with things unspoken. Clara Whitmore sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers twisted into the white cotton sheets so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. She was 21 years old, but her eyes held the weariness of someone who had lived through 100 lifetimes of pain. Her chestnut hair fell loose around her shoulders, and in the lamplight, her skin looked almost translucent, like paper that had been handled too many times. 3 days ago, she had arrived in Abilene on the public stagecoach, carrying nothing but a small leather valise and a crumpled newspaper advertisement folded into the pocket of her traveling dress. The advertisement had been her lifeline, her only hope of escape. Now she sat in this stranger's cabin wearing a simple white nightgown that Ruth Caldwell had gifted her after the wedding ceremony that morning. She was a married woman, a wife, and it was her wedding night. Samuel Brennan stood 3 paces from the bed, close enough to see the lamplight, catching the tears that trembled on Clara's lashes, far enough that he hoped she would not feel cornered. He was 39 years old, broad-shouldered and weathered by a decade of working this land alone. His hands were rough with calluses, his face carved by sun and wind and grief. A faded scar traced a line down his left cheek, a souvenir from Gettysburg that he never spoke about. He had been a widower for 10 years. 10 years of silence in this cabin. 10 years of eating alone, sleeping alone, waking to nothing but the empty space where Martha used to lie. When he had placed that advertisement in the Kansas Herald, he had not expected much. He certainly had not expected the letter that arrived 3 weeks later, written in careful, precise handwriting that somehow conveyed desperation between every line. He had not expected to feel something stir in his chest when he read it, something he thought had died with Martha. And he had not expected this trembling girl who flinched at shadows, this haunted creature who could not meet his eyes. Sam took a step forward, reaching out to touch her shoulder in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. Clara recoiled so violently she nearly fell off the bed. The sound that escaped her lips was not quite a word. It was something broken, something raw, a plea from deep within her chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. "It hurts. This is my first time." Sam froze mid-motion. The words themselves were not unusual for a wedding night, but the way she said them, the naked terror in her voice. This was not the nervousness of a shy bride. This was fear in its purest form, the kind of fear that comes from knowing exactly what pain feels like. "It will be over quick," Sam said, gently trying to calm her. But as he reached toward her again, Clara flinched so hard that her sleeve slipped down her arm. And Sam saw them, the bruises, not one or two, a constellation of them, a map of suffering written on her flesh. Old bruises that had faded to sickly yellow and green, layered over white scars that had healed long ago. There were marks shaped like fingers where someone had gripped on her arm hard enough to leave prints. There were long welts, the kind left by a belt or a switch. Sam had seen wounds before. He had watched men die on battlefields, had held his best friend's hand as life drained from a hole in his chest at Antietam. He knew what violence looked like, but this was different. This was systematic, deliberate, the work of someone who had hurt this girl over and over again for years with cold precision. His hands began to shake, not from fear, from rage. "Who did this to you?" His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. Clara did not answer with words. She simply collapsed into herself, her whole body curling inward as the warmth tore through her. These were not the gentle tears of a nervous bride. These were the sounds of someone who had held everything inside for far too long, and now the dam had finally broken. Sam stood there feeling something crack open in his own chest, something he had kept locked away since he buried Martha on the hill behind this cabin. He did not touch her. He did not move closer. He simply waited, letting her cry, giving her the space that instinct told him she desperately needed. When the sobs finally began to quiet, Sam walked to the wash basin in the corner of the room. He dipped a clean cloth into the cool water, wrung it out, and returned to sit on the edge of the bed. Not close enough to crowd her. Just close enough that she could see him, could hear him. "Listen to me," he said, his voice steady and calm. The same voice he had used to give orders under cannon fire. The voice that men trusted with their lives. You are safe now. I did not bring you here to hurt you. I brought you here because I needed a partner, not a servant, and partners do not hurt each other. Clara looked up at him through wet lashes, her eyes red and swollen. There was disbelief there, the kind of disbelief that comes from having been promised safety before, only to have that promise broken. We are going to take this slow, Sam continued. No rush. We have all the time in the world. Tonight you sleep on the bed. I will take the floor. And tomorrow we start over. As friends first. Everything else can come later if it comes at all. Agreed. For a long moment, Clara simply stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the trap, for the cruelty that she had learned to expect from men. She found nothing but a weathered honesty. Agreed, she whispered. Sam nodded once. He grabbed a wool blanket from the chest at the foot of the bed and made himself a spot on the wooden floor. The planks were hard and cold against his back, and he knew his spine would ache in the morning. He did not care. As he lay there staring at the ceiling, one question burned in his mind like a brand. What kind of monster had put his hands on a defenseless girl for years? And what would Sam do if that monster ever showed up at his ranch? He did not sleep that night. He lay awake in the darkness, listening to Clara's breathing, gradually slow into something like rest, and he made a silent vow. Whatever had hurt this girl, whoever had broken her, would never touch her again. Not while he still drew breath. The morning came slowly, the way Kansas mornings do in summer. The darkness did not simply end. It softened gradually as the eastern sky turned from black to deep blue to pale gold. Birds began to call from the cottonwood trees along the creek, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. Clara woke to something she had not experienced in 5 years. The smell of breakfast being cooked by someone else. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The scent of frying bacon and strong coffee pulled her from sleep. An instinct sent a bolt of panic through her chest. In Ohio, she had always been the one cooking. She had always been awake before dawn, preparing Harold's breakfast exactly the way he liked it. If it was not ready when he came downstairs, if the eggs were too runny or the coffee too weak, there would be consequences. Her body tensed, ready to leap from the bed and run to the kitchen. Then she remembered. This was not Ohio. This was Kansas. And the man standing at the cast iron stove, spatula in hand, was not Harold Foster. Clara sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders like armor. In the daylight filtering through the cabin's single window, she could see the space more clearly than she had the night before. It was simple, a single room that served as bedroom, kitchen, and living space. The bed was pushed against one wall, a sturdy frame of hand-hewn oak. There was a table in the center of the room with 2 mismatched chairs. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, cold now in the summer heat. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of preserved vegetables, tins of flour and sugar, a few battered books. Everything was clean. Not spotless the way Harold demanded, where a single speck of dust could earn a beating, but honestly clean. The kind of clean that came from a man who lived alone and took care of his own space without fuss. Morning, Sam said without turning around. Hope you like your eggs scrambled. I am not fancy, but I can feed us. Clara rose from the bed, still clutching the blanket, and walked to the small table. She sat down carefully as if the chair might be a trap. You did not have to do this, she said quietly. Sam finally turned around and she saw that he looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes and his movements were stiff, as though his back was bothering him. He had slept on that hard floor all night. For her. Neither did you, he replied, half a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. When you agreed to marry a stubborn old rancher you had never met. He set a plate in front of her, scrambled eggs, 3 strips of bacon, a slice of bread that looked homemade. Then he poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug and placed it beside the plate. Clara looked at the food. Then she looked at Sam. In her entire memory, no man had ever cooked for her. Not her father, who had died when she was 8. Certainly not Harold, who believed that a woman's place was in the kitchen and a man's place was at the head of the table being served. Thank you, she said, the words coming out strange and unfamiliar. Sam sat down across from her with his own plate. He did not say anything about the night before. He did not ask about the bruises or the tears or the terror. Instead, he talked about the ranch. He told her about Bessie, the milk cow, with an attitude problem who liked to kick anyone who got too close. He told her about Daisy, the gentle mare he had raised from a foal who was so calm that even a child could ride her. He told her about the Caldwells, Ruth and Ezra, the elderly couple who lived on the neighboring homestead and who had been his only friends during the long years of solitude. Clara listened, eating slowly, taking small bites. For the first time in years, she ate without fear, without watching the door from the corner of her eye, without tensing at every sound. When the plate was empty, she realized something that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She had not been hit for eating too slowly. She had not been criticized for leaving crumbs. She had simply been allowed to eat like a normal person in peace. It was such a small thing, such a tiny scrap of dignity. But to Clara, it felt like the first breath of air after nearly drowning. The days that followed began to blur together, each one bringing small revelations that slowly, painfully began to reshape Clara's understanding of what life could be. Ruth Caldwell came to visit that first weekend, arriving in a small wagon driven by her husband, Ezra. She was 58 years old, a round woman with warm brown eyes and silver-streaked hair that she wore in a practical bun. Her face was weathered by decades of prairie sun, but there was kindness in every line. When Ruth saw Clara, she immediately wrapped her arms around the young woman in an embrace that was meant to welcome. Clara went rigid, her whole body locked up, every muscle tense, her arms frozen at her sides. She did not know how to respond to this. In Ohio, physical contact had always meant pain. A hand on her shoulder was a prelude to being shaken. An arm around her waist was the beginning of being dragged somewhere she did not want to go. Ruth felt the tension immediately. She was a former school teacher, a woman who had spent years working with children from difficult homes. She recognized the signs of someone who had been hurt. Without making a fuss, Ruth released Clara and took a step back, giving her space. "Come walk with me," Ruth said gently. "Let me show you the garden. Sam plants things but takes care of them like he is watering rocks." They walked together through the dusty yard, past the chicken coop and the small corral, where Daisy stood switching her tail at flies. Ruth pointed out the tomato plants, the bean poles, the struggling squash vines that clearly needed more attention than Sam had been giving them. She talked about herself as they walked, about how she had come to Kansas as a mail-order bride herself more than 30 years ago, about leaving Boston at 25 to marry a man she had never met in a place she had never seen. "Ezra was not my first choice," Ruth admitted, her voice matter of fact. "I loved someone else back in Boston, but he was not a good man. Sometimes running from the wrong person leads you straight to the right one." Clara stopped walking. She looked at Ruth, really looked at her, and saw understanding in those kind eyes. "You know," Clara said. It was not a question. Ruth nodded slowly. "I do not need to know the details, child. That is your story to tell when you are ready. But I want you to know something." She reached out and gently took Clara's hand. "Sam Brennan is a good man. He has been through his own hell, and it made him hard on the outside. Cold, some people say. But he would never, ever hurt you. That I can promise." Clara felt tears burning in her eyes again. She seemed to be crying constantly now. All the tears she had held back for 5 years finally demanding release. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "When I came here, I did not know what to expect. I just knew I had to get away." And now Clara thought about the question, about the breakfast Sam had cooked, about the floor he had slept on, about the way he had looked at her bruises with horror instead of satisfaction. "Oh, now I am still afraid," she admitted, "but maybe a little less than yesterday." Ruth squeezed her hand. "That is how healing works, child. A little less afraid each day, until one morning you wake up and realize the fear is gone." That afternoon, while Ruth helped Clara in the cabin, showing her where things were kept and how Sam liked his coffee, Sam took Ezra to check on the cattle in the north pasture. Ezra Caldwell was 62 years old, tall and lean as a fence post, with a face that rarely showed expression. He had been a blacksmith before his joints got too stiff, and his hands still bore the scars of hot metal and heavy hammers. He was a man of few words, but the words he spoke carried weight. "The girl," Ezra said as they rode, "she is running from something." It was not a question. Sam nodded. "Someone hurt her. For a long time. I do not know the full story yet." Ezra was quiet for a while, his eyes scanning the horizon out of long habit. "You going to protect her?" Sam thought about the bruises on Clara's arms, about the terror in her eyes, about the way she flinched at sudden movements. "I'm going to try." Ezra nodded once satisfied. "Good. Ruth already loves her like a daughter. Hurt that girl, you will answer to my wife. And believe me, Brennan, you do not want that. Despite himself, Sam almost smiled. I believe you. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Sam taught Clara the rhythms of ranch life not as a master teaching a servant, but as a partner sharing knowledge. The first lesson was Bessie. The milk cow had a reputation that extended across 3 counties. She was ornery, stubborn, and possessed of a mean streak that had sent more than one farmhand limping home with bruised shins. Sam had won her in a poker game 5 years ago and had regretted it ever since. She does not like anyone, Sam warned as they approached the small barn. Do not take it personal. Clara approached the cow carefully, bucket in hand, the way Sam had shown her. She sat on the milking stool, positioned herself correctly, and reached for Bessie's udder. Bessie kicked her square in the shin. Clara yelped and stumbled backward, dropping the bucket. Pain shot up her leg, and for a moment, instinct took over. She braced herself, waiting for the blow that always followed when she made a mistake. The blow did not come. Sam was laughing. Not cruel laughter, not the mocking sound she remembered from Ohio. This was genuine amusement, warm and surprised. Well, he said, helping her to her feet, consider yourself officially initiated. Bessie hates everyone. That kick means you are part of the family now. Clara stared at him, still braced for punishment that was not coming. You are not angry, she asked. Sam looked confused. Why would I be angry? That cow has kicked me more times than I can count. She is just ornery. Come on, I will show you the trick to getting around her bad side. Something shifted in Clara's chest that day. A tiny crack in the wall she had built around herself. The riding lessons came next. Daisy was everything Sam had promised. Sweet-tempered, patient, and steady as a rock. Clara had never been allowed to ride in Ohio. Harold said horses were too dangerous for women, too expensive to risk on feminine foolishness. The first time Clara climbed into the saddle, her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the reins. Sam walked beside her, one hand resting on Daisy's neck, talking in a low, steady voice. Just relax. Let her feel that you trust her. Horses know when you are scared. They walked in slow circles around the corral. Then when Clara's breathing had steadied, Sam opened the gate and led them out into the open pasture. The prairie stretched out around them, endless and golden, under the summer sun. The sky was so big, it seemed to swallow the whole world. There were no walls here, no locked doors, no narrow hallways where you could be cornered with nowhere to run. Ready to try a little faster? Sam asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Sam stepped back. Give her a gentle kick, not hard, just a tap. Clara tapped Daisy's sides, and the mare broke into an easy canter. Wind rushed through Clara's hair. The ground flowed beneath her like water. For the first time in 5 years, she felt something she had forgotten existed. Freedom. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, surprising her with its sound. She was laughing, actually laughing. The wind tore the sound away, carrying it across the prairie, and Clara did not care. She let Daisy run faster and faster until she was flying across the Kansas grassland with tears streaming down her face. When she finally slowed and turned back toward the ranch, Sam was watching her with an expression she did not recognize. It was almost like pride. The shooting lessons began in the 3rd week. Sam set his spare revolver on the kitchen table after dinner, the metal gleaming in the lamplight. I want to teach you to use this, he said. Clara stared at the gun. She had seen Harold's guns, of course. He kept them locked in a cabinet in his study, polishing them with the same care he gave to nothing else. But she had never been allowed to touch them, never been trusted with anything that could be used as a weapon. Why, she asked. Sam met her eyes. Because I cannot always be here. And if something happens, you need to be able to protect yourself. Clara thought about the implications of those words, about what he was really saying, about what he was afraid might come. You think he will find me, she said quietly. Sam did not insult her by pretending not to understand. I think anyone who did what was done to you does not let go easy, and I think you deserve to never feel helpless again. They went outside, Sam setting up a row of empty bottles on the fence. The first time Clara tried to fire the gun, her hands shook so badly she could not pull the trigger. The sound of Sam cocking his own weapon, demonstrating the motion, sent her into a spiral of panic. She was back in Ohio, back in the dark house on Maple Street, back listening to Harold slam doors and throw things, the sounds of violence that always preceded the actual blows. Clara dropped the gun and fell to her knees, gasping for breath. Sam did not rush to her. He did not grab her or shake her or demand that she pull herself together. He simply sat down on the ground a few feet away, giving her space, and waited. "Take your time," he said quietly. "We have got all the time in the world." It took nearly an hour before Clara could pick up the gun again. It took another 3 days before she could fire it without crying. But 2 weeks after that first lesson, Clara Brennan stood in the afternoon sunshine and put 3 bullets through 3 bottles at 20 feet. Her hands did not shake at all. There were moments of brightness in those early weeks, small victories that accumulated like coins in a jar. One afternoon, when the Kansas sun was blazing hot and Sam was fighting with a particularly stubborn fence post, Clara started to laugh. Sam stopped mid-swing, his hammer frozen in the air. "What?" he asked. Clara was bent over, the hands on her knees, laughing so hard that tears streamed down her face. It was the first real laugh Sam had heard from her. Not the nervous giggles of someone trying to please, but genuine, uncontrollable mirth. "You," she gasped, "you have been cursing at that fence post for 5 minutes straight, like it personally insulted your mother." Sam looked down at the crooked post, then back at Clara, and felt his own lips twitching. "It is a stubborn post," he said with as much dignity as he could muster. "Stubbornness runs in the family." Clara laughed harder, and then impossibly Sam was laughing too. They stood there in the golden afternoon light, laughing together like fools, and something shifted between them. Something that had nothing to do with marriage contracts or mail order arrangements or the shadows of the past. That night, as Sam was preparing his usual spot on the floor, Clara spoke from the bed. "You could sleep up here, if you want." Sam went still. "Only if you are sure," he said carefully. "I am sure." They lay on opposite sides of the bed, a careful 2 feet of space between them. Sam stared at the ceiling, hyper-aware of her presence beside him, afraid to move or breathe too loudly. Sometime around midnight, Clara's hand crept across the sheets. Her fingers found his rough and calloused, and she held on. Sam did not move. He simply held her hand, back gentle, as if he were cradling something infinitely precious. Neither of them slept much that night, but for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. But even as Clara began to heal, the darkness from her past was already reaching toward them. It started with sounds in the night. Clara woke suddenly, pulled from sleep by something she could not name. The cabin was dark, the lamp having burned out hours ago, and moonlight streamed through the window in pale silver bars. There, outside, the snap of a twig, the soft thud of hooves on packed earth. "Sam." She shook his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Someone is outside." Sam was awake instantly, years of war having trained him to come alert at the slightest sound of danger. He reached for the shotgun propped in the corner and moved toward the door, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Stay here," he breathed. He eased the door open and slipped into the night. The prairie was vast and silver under the moon. The wind stirred the grass, creating the waves of movement that could hide anything. Sam stood on the porch, shotgun ready, eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing. Or maybe something at the edge of vision where the road met the horizon. A shadow that might have been a rider, or might have been nothing at all. After a long moment, Sam went back inside. "Just animals probably," he said, but his voice was not convincing. The next morning, while Clara was preparing breakfast, Sam walked the perimeter of the cabin. He found what he was looking for near the road. Hoof prints, not wild horses. These prints were from a shod horse, the marks of iron shoes pressed into the dust. The trail led from the main road toward the cabin, circled around the property, and then headed back the way it had come. Someone had been watching them. Sam did not tell Clara. He did not want to frighten her. But that night and every night afterward, he slept with the shotgun within arm's reach. He also made a trip to town the next day, stopping at the sheriff's office to have a quiet word with Daniel Webb. "Keep an ear out," Sam said. "Anyone asking about my place, about my wife, I want to know." Webb, a grizzled man of 50 who had served under Sam's command in the war, nodded grimly. "You expecting trouble, Brennan?" Sam thought about the bruises on Clara's arms, about the terror in her eyes. "I am expecting someone to come looking for something they think belongs to them, and I want to be ready when they do." More weeks passed. Summer mellowed into early autumn, and the prairie began to shift from green to gold. Clara grew stronger, more confident. The flinching happened less often now. She smiled more easily. She even sang sometimes soft songs she remembered from childhood while she worked in the kitchen. Sam watched her bloom like a flower, finally given sunlight, and felt something growing in his own chest. Something he had thought died with Martha. Something he was afraid to name. Then came the letter. It was late August when Sam rode into Abilene to buy supplies. The general store, the feed depot, the usual rounds. He was about to head home when the postmaster called out to him. "Brennan, got something for you. Letter from Ohio." Sam's blood went cold. He took the envelope with numb fingers, staring at the return address written in precise, educated handwriting. Harold Foster, Columbus, Ohio. Sam stepped outside, away from curious eyes, and tore open the envelope. "Dear Mr. Brennan, I write to you concerning my stepdaughter, Clara Whitmore, who I believe is currently residing at your property. Clara fled my home 2 months ago, taking with her a sum of money and my best horse. This constitutes theft, and I intend to pursue legal remedies. I am prepared to be reasonable. Return Clara to me, and I will consider the matter closed. Refuse, and I will be forced to involve the authorities. I trust you will make the right decision. Sincerely, Harold Foster." Sam read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. His hands were shaking, not with fear, with a rage so cold and pure that it frightened even him. Harold Foster. The name finally had a face in Sam's mind, or rather, the name finally had a shape. The shape of a monster who beat a defenseless girl for 5 years and now had the audacity to call her a thief. Sam rode home in silence, the letter burning in his pocket like a coal. He did not show it to Clara. He could not bear to watch the fear return to her eyes. Not yet. Not when she was finally beginning to heal. But late that night, when Clara was asleep and the cabin was quiet, and Sam sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter of his own to Sheriff Webb, to a lawyer in town, to anyone who might be able to help. Because Sam knew with the certainty of a man who had seen war that Harold Foster would not stop with letters. He was coming. And when he arrived, Sam intended to be ready. 400 miles away in a grand house on Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio, Harold Foster sat in his study reading a letter by lamplight. The letter was from a man named Silas Morgan, a man Harold had used before for delicate matters. A man who knew how to find things. And people. "I have located the girl. She is living on a ranch near Abilene, Kansas, with a man named Samuel Brennan. They were married in July. The property is isolated about 8 miles from town. Brennan is a former Union soldier, keeps to himself. The girl appears healthy and is not being held against her will, awaiting your instructions." Harold set the letter down and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been told exactly where to find his lost property. Clara thought she could run, thought she could hide, thought some frontier farmer could protect her from the consequences of her disobedience. She was wrong. Harold rose from his desk and walked to the cabinet where he kept his guns. He selected his favorite pistol, checked the chambers, and slid it into his coat pocket. "Prepare the horses," he told his butler. "I am taking a trip." "For how long, sir?" Harold's smile widened. "However long it takes to bring my daughter home." Sam did not sleep the night after he received the letter from Harold Foster. He lay on the bed beside Clara, listening to her soft breathing, watching the moonlight trace patterns across the ceiling. His mind kept returning to those words written in such polite, civilized handwriting, as if the man who had beaten Clara for 5 years was simply requesting the return of a borrowed book. "Return Clara to me." The rage Sam felt was not the hot, explosive kind that comes and goes in a flash. This was something colder, deeper, the kind of anger that settles into a man's bones and becomes part of him. He had seen men like Harold Foster during the war. Officers who sent soldiers to die with the same casual indifference they used to order breakfast. Men who believed their wealth and position entitled them to treat other human beings as property. Sam had watched men like that die at Gettysburg. He had stepped over their rare bodies without remorse. But this was different. This was not war. This was Kansas in peacetime, where the law was supposed to protect the innocent. And Sam knew with the bitter wisdom of experience that the law did not always side with those who deserved its protection. The next morning, while Clara was feeding the chickens, Sam rode into Abilene to see Sheriff Daniel Webb. Webb's office was a small wooden building at the end of Main Street, wedged between the general store and the livery stable. Inside, it smelled of coffee and gun oil, and the walls were covered with wanted posters that had faded yellow in the sun. Webb looked up from his desk as Sam entered. He was 50 years old with gray hair cropped close to his skull and a face that had been weathered by 3 decades of frontier law enforcement. He and Sam had served together during the war, and that shared history meant something out here where trust was harder to come by than gold. Brennan, Webb said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. You look like hell. What is wrong? Sam pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it over without a word. Webb read it slowly, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he set the paper down and let out a long breath. Harold Foster, he said. The name mean anything to you? He is my wife's stepfather. He beat her for 5 years after her mother died. That is why she ran. Webb nodded slowly. And now he wants her back. He is calling her a thief, says she stole money and a horse. Did she? Sam thought about Clara arriving in Abilene with nothing but a small valise and a desperate letter. He thought about the bruises on her arms, the scars on her back, the terror in her eyes. She took what she needed to survive, Sam said quietly. And even if she took every penny he owned, it would not be a fraction of what he owes her for what he did. Webb was silent for a moment, turning the letter over in his hands. Here is the problem, he said finally. If Foster comes here with legal papers from Ohio, there is only so much I can do. A letter accusing someone of theft is not proof of anything, but a warrant signed by a judge, that is different. And if he brings a warrant, Webb met Sam's eyes, then we have to go through the courts, prove that Clara was fleeing abuse, not committing a crime. It can be done, but it takes time, and money, and witnesses. Sam felt something tighten in his chest. You are saying he might win. I am saying men with money have a way of making the law work in their favor. That does not mean we give up. It means we prepare. Sam leaned forward. What do I need to do? Document everything, the bruises, the scars. Get Clara to write down what happened to her, dates and details, anything she can remember. Find people who knew her in Ohio, anyone who might have seen what Foster did. Build a case. And in the meantime, Webb's expression hardened. In the meantime, watch your back. Men like Foster do not always rely on the law to get what they want. If he decides to take matters into his own hands, you need to be ready. Sam rode home with Webb's words echoing in his mind. He did not tell Clara about the letter. Not yet. She was finally beginning to heal, finally learning to smile again. He could not bear to watch the fear return to her eyes. But secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried. It was 3 days later when Clara found the letter. Sam had been careless. He had left his coat draped over the chair by the door, the letter still in the pocket. Clara was tidying up while Sam was out checking on the cattle, and the paper fell to the floor when she moved the coat. She recognized the handwriting immediately. For a long moment, she simply stood there, staring at the familiar loops and curves of Harold's penmanship. Her hands began to shake. Her vision tunneled until all she could see was that name at the bottom of the page, Harold Foster. He knew where she was. By the time Sam returned to the cabin, Clara had read the letter 4 times. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the paper spread before her, her face pale as bleached bone. You were going to tell me about this. Her voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. Sam stopped in the doorway. He saw the letter, saw the look in her eyes, and felt something sink in his chest. Clara, I was trying to protect you. By treating me like a child. She looked up at him, and there was something new in her expression, something he had never seen before. Anger. I am not property, Sam. Not his property and not yours. If Harold is coming for me, I have a right to know. Sam opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right. He knew she was right. He had been so focused on shielding her from pain that he had forgotten she was not a porcelain doll to be kept on a shelf. You are right, he said. I am sorry. The apology seemed to take some of the fire out of her. Clara slumped back in her chair, pressing her hands to her face. He will not stop, she whispered. You do not know him like I do. He will never stop. Not until he drags me back to Ohio or kills me trying. Sam crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, careful not to touch her without permission. Then we will be ready, he said. Sheriff Webb is watching for him. The neighbors know to keep their eyes open, and I am not going to let anyone take you from this ranch. Clara looked at him through her fingers. What if you cannot stop him? Sam thought about the shotgun by the door. the revolver in the drawer, the years of combat training that had made him one of the deadliest marksmen in his regiment. "Then I will die trying," he said simply, "but I do not plan to lose." That night, Clara did something she had never done before. She told Sam everything. They lay in bed, the lamp turned low shadows dancing on the walls. And Clara spoke. About her father who died when she was 8. About her mother, beautiful Lillian, who remarried Harold Foster because she had no other choice. About the first beating the night of her mother's funeral when Harold's mask of civility finally slipped. She told him about the years that followed, the isolation, the control, the way Harold monitored every aspect of her life, deciding what she could eat, what she could wear, who she could speak to. She told him about the punishments for the smallest infractions. A look deemed disrespectful, a chore completed too slowly, a word spoken out of turn. She told him about her mother's death, which the doctor called consumption, but which Clara knew was really heartbreak and exhaustion, and years of hidden abuse finally taking their toll. And she told him about the night she escaped, stealing into Harold's study while he lay drunk in his bedroom, taking just enough money for a train ticket, slipping out the back door into the darkness of a moonless night. "I thought I would die before I made it out of Ohio," Clara whispered. "Every shadow looked like him. Every sound made me jump. But I kept going because anything was better than staying." Sam listened without interrupting. When she finally fell silent, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said, "and I have fought beside men who charge cannon fire without flinching." Clara shook her head. "I do not feel brave. I feel scared. All the time." "That is what bravery is," Sam said quietly. "Doing what needs to be done, even when you are terrified. You could have given up 100 times. You did not. That is not weakness, Clara. That is strength." She was crying now, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. But these were different from the desperate sobs of their wedding night. These tears felt like release. Clara leaned forward and kissed him. It was the first time she had initiated contact, the first time she had reached for him instead of waiting to be reached for. The kiss was soft and tentative, a question more than a statement. Sam answered it carefully, letting her set the pace, ready to stop the moment she pulled away. She did not pull away. What happened next was slow and gentle, and nothing like what Clara had feared. Sam asked permission at every step, watching her face for any sign of discomfort, stopping when she needed to breathe, waiting until she was ready to continue. When it was over, Clara wept again. But this time Sam understood. These were tears of healing, tears of reclamation. She was taking back something that had been stolen from her, learning that intimacy did not have to mean pain. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for being patient." "Thank you," Sam replied, kissing the top of her head, "for trusting me." The false peace lasted 3 more weeks. On a cold October morning, Sam rode into Abilene to buy winter supplies. The general store was crowded with farmers stocking up before the first snow, and Sam had to wait in line to place his order. While he waited, he noticed a stranger at the counter. The man was about 35, with dark hair and a thin scar running along his jaw. He was dressed like a traveler, dust on his boots and road dirt on his coat. But there was something about the way he carried himself that made Sam's instincts prickle. The man was asking questions. "Brennan Ranch," Sam heard him say to the shopkeeper. "Looking for work, heard there might be some available." The shopkeeper glanced at Sam, recognition flickering in his eyes, then back at the stranger. "Cannot say I know anything about that. You might try the cattle outfits south of town." The stranger nodded and left, but not before his eyes swept across the store. For just a moment, his gaze met Sam's. Something passed between them. Recognition of a kind, the look of two predators sizing each other up. Sam finished his business quickly and went straight to the sheriff's office. "Thin scar on the jaw," Webb said when Sam described the man. "That sounds like Silas Morgan. He has been in town about a week. Claims he is looking for work, but he has not taken any jobs that I know of." "Who is he?" Webb's expression darkened. "A fixer. The kind of man rich folks hire when they want something done quietly. He has never been convicted of anything, but there are rumors. Intimidation. Beatings. Worse." Sam felt ice forming in his stomach. "Foster sent him." "That would be my guess. He has probably been watching your place, figuring out the lay of the land, sending reports back to Ohio." "Can you arrest him?" "For what looking for work is not a crime." Webb leaned back in his chair. but I can make sure he knows he is being watched. Sometimes that is enough to make men like Morgan move on. It was not enough. That night, Sam stayed awake watching through the cabin window. Near dawn, just as the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, he saw it. A rider on the road, moving slowly past the ranch, silhouetted against the stars, watching. Sam did not tell Clara about Silas Morgan, but he doubled his vigilance, never leaving her alone at the ranch, always making sure someone, Ezra or Ruth or one of the other neighbors, was nearby when he had to go to town. It was not enough. The confrontation came on a gray Tuesday morning near the end of October. Clara was hanging laundry in the yard, the sheets snapping in the cold wind, when she heard the sound of wagon wheels. She looked up and felt the world stop. A wagon was rolling up the drive, pulled by two fine horses that were completely out of place on the Kansas prairie. And climbing down from the driver's seat, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than the entire Brennan Ranch, was Harold Foster. He had aged in the 5 years since she had seen him last. There was more gray in his hair, more weight around his middle, but his eyes were the same, small and dark and utterly without warmth. The eyes of a snake. Beside the wagon, Sheriff Webb sat on his horse, his expression grim. "There she is," Harold said, pointing at Clara like she was a stray dog to be collected. "My stepdaughter, the thief who ran away in the night." Clara's legs would not move. Her hands would not unclench from the sheet she was holding. 5 years of fear crashed over her like a wave, and for a terrible moment she was 16 again, cowering in the corner of her bedroom while Harold unbuckled his belt. "Sheriff," Harold's voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of a respectable businessman dealing with an unfortunate situation. "I trust you will help me resolve this matter." Webb did not look happy to be there. "This man claims you stole money and a horse when you left Ohio, Mrs. Brennan. He has documentation." "Documentation," Clara heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Bills of sale, bank records." Harold smiled, and it was the smile Clara remembered from 1,000 nightmares. "I am a thorough man, Clara. You know that." She wanted to run. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to flee, to get on Daisy and ride until she reached the edge of the world. But then she heard hoofbeats. Sam came thundering up on his horse, having spotted the wagon from the north pasture. He swung down from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped, his hand already on the revolver at his hip. "Get off my land," he said. His voice was quiet. Quiet from Sam was more dangerous than shouting. Harold's smile did not waver. "Mr. Brennan, I presume." "I am Harold Foster, Clara's stepfather. I have come to discuss a family matter." "There is nothing to discuss. Clara is my wife. Whatever you think she owes you, you can take up with a lawyer." "I intend to, but I had hoped we could resolve this more amicably." Harold spread his hands, the picture of reasonableness. "She took $500 from my safe and my best horse. Surely you can understand why I would want restitution." "Restitution?" Sam's voice was flat. "That is what you are calling it." Something flickered in Harold's eyes. Just for a moment the mask slipped and Clara saw the monster underneath. Then it was back smooth and civilized. "What would you call it, Mr. Brennan?" Sam looked at Clara. Their eyes met and something passed between them. "Show them," Sam said. Clara understood. Her hands shook as she reached for the buttons of her coat, as she rolled up her sleeve to expose her forearm. The scars were still there. The old bruises had faded, but the marks of Harold's belt, his fist, his cane, were written permanently on her flesh. Sheriff Webb stared. His face went pale, then red. 5 years, Clara said, and her voice was stronger now. 5 years of this. That is the care he is talking about. Harold's expression did not change. "She is lying. Those could be from anything. Farm work, accidents. 5 years worth of accidents." Sam stepped forward, putting himself between Clara and Harold. "On a girl who was locked in the house most days." Webb had seen enough. "Mr. Foster," he said slowly, "I strongly suggest you get back in that wagon and ride for Ohio. Right now. Beating women is a crime in Kansas, and I am starting to think I should wire your hometown judge and ask some hard questions." Harold's mask cracked further. His face flushed with anger, and for just a moment, Clara saw him as he truly was. Not the respectable businessman. The monster. "She is my property," Harold snarled. "I raised her. I fed her. I kept a roof over her head. She belongs to me. She is my wife, Sam said. Legal and proper. And if you do not get off my land in the next 60 seconds, I will remove you myself. Harold looked from Sam to Webb to Clara. Something calculated passed through his eyes. Then he smiled again. That terrible, patient smile. This is not over, he said to Clara. You think you can humiliate me and escape? You think this farmer can protect you? He climbed back into the wagon, still smiling. I will be back. And next time there will not be a sheriff to hide behind. They watched him drive away, dust trailing behind the wagon. Clara collapsed against Sam, shaking so hard she could barely stand. It is done, Sam said, holding her. He is gone. But even as he said the words, he knew they were not true. This was not done. This was just beginning. The days that followed were tense and watchful. Sam organized a network of neighbors to keep eyes on the roads. Ezra came to stay at the cabin whenever Sam had to be away. Sheriff Webb increased his patrols near the ranch. But Harold Foster had disappeared. He had checked out of the Abilene Hotel the day after the confrontation and had not been seen since. Silas Morgan vanished as well. The silence was worse than the threat. Clara tried to return to normal life, but the fear had come back. She jumped at every sound, watched every shadow. The confidence she had built over the past months seemed to drain away, replaced by the old terror. Then one evening in early November, Clara found a note under the cabin door. It was written in Harold's handwriting. Naughty girl. Father will be home soon. Clara's scream brought Sam running from the barn. She stood in the doorway, holding the paper, trembling so violently that the note shook in her hands. He was here, she gasped. He was at our door. Sam took the note, read it, and felt something cold settle in his chest. Harold was playing games, psychological warfare, letting them know he could reach them whenever he wanted. We need to leave, Clara said. We need to run. He will never stop Sam. Never. Sam took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. If we run, we will be running forever. He will chase us across every territory in America. The only way to end this is to stand and fight. What if we lose? Then we lose together. But I am not going to let him win without a fight. He pulled her close. You stood up to him once, Clara. In front of the sheriff, you showed your scars. You told the truth. You did not run. That took more courage than anything I have ever done. I was terrified. Of course you were, but you did it anyway. That is who you are now, not the scared girl who ran from Ohio, a woman who stands her ground. Clara was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. If he comes, she said, I will not hide. Not this time. Sam kissed her forehead. That is my wife. The attack came 2 weeks later. It was a Saturday night, cold and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Sam and Clara had finished dinner and were preparing for bed when the sound of shattering glass split the air. Sam was on his feet instantly, grabbing the shotgun from beside the door. Through the window, he saw flames. Someone had thrown a bottle of burning oil at the barn. The dry wood caught immediately, fire racing up the walls, smoke billowing into the night sky. The horses, Clara cried. Stay inside, Sam shouted, and ran into the darkness. It was a trap. Sam was halfway to the barn when two figures emerged from the shadows. Silas Morgan and another man, a rough-looking character with a face like a clenched fist. Sam raised the shotgun, but Morgan was faster. He lunged forward, knocking the barrel aside just as Sam fired. The shot went wide, blasting into the night. They struggled, and Sam felt himself losing ground. Morgan was younger, stronger, and had been trained for this kind of work. A fist connected with Sam's jaw. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He staggered, and the shotgun was wrenched from his hands. Inside the cabin, Clara heard the fight. She ran to the drawer and pulled out Sam's spare revolver. The weight of it was familiar now, comfortable in her hands. All those hours of practice and all those bottles she had shot off the fence had led to this moment. She turned toward the door just as it burst open. Harold Foster stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the flames from the burning barn. His fine suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and in his hand was a pistol. Did you think you could run from me? His voice was shaking with rage. Did you think some dirt farmer could protect you? Clara raised her gun. Stay back, she said. Harold laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You point a gun at me. He took a step forward. You do not have the spine, girl. You never did. Clara's hands were steady. She was surprised by that after all the fear, all the nightmares her hands were steady. You are right, she said. The old Clara did not have the spine. She thought about the girl she had been 5 years ago, 16 and terrified watching her mother being lowered into the ground knowing that she was next. She thought about the years of beatings, the years of silence, the years of learning to make herself invisible. And she thought about the woman she had become, the woman who could ride a horse across the open prairie, the woman who could hit a bottle at 20 feet, the woman who had stood before a sheriff and shown her scars without shame. I am not her anymore, Clara said. Harold's smile faltered. Put the gun down, Clara. You know what happens when you disobey me. I know what used to happen. Clara's voice was calm now, terrifyingly calm. But this is not Ohio, and you are not in charge anymore. Harold raised his own pistol. I am warning you, girl. Clara pulled the trigger. The bullet caught Harold in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing against the doorframe. His gun clattered to the floor. For a moment there was only silence. Then Harold began to scream. Outside, Sam heard the shot. He brought his elbow back hard into Morgan's stomach, breaking free of the man's grip. Morgan doubled over, and Sam did not hesitate. He drove his knee into Morgan's face, feeling bone crunch under the impact. Morgan went down and did not get up. The second man turned to run, but Sam tackled him before he made it 3 steps. A few brutal punches later, that fight was over too. Sam scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the cabin. He found Clara standing over Harold, the revolver still pointed at her stepfather's chest. Harold was writhing on the floor, clutching his bloody shoulder, screaming curses and threats. Clara, Sam's voice was gentle. Clara, you can lower the gun now. She did not move. Her eyes were fixed on Harold, and there was something in her expression that Sam had never seen before. Power. He cannot hurt me anymore, Clara said. It was not a question. No, he cannot. Slowly, Clara lowered the revolver. I shot him, she said as if just realizing what she had done. You protected yourself. Sam took the gun from her hands and pulled her into his arms. That is what you did. You protected yourself. Clara buried her face in his chest, and the tears finally came. Not tears of fear this time. These were the tears of someone who had faced their monster and won. It is over, Sam murmured into her hair. This time it is really over. Outside, the neighbors who had seen the fire were arriving bringing buckets and blankets. The barn would need to be rebuilt, but the horses had escaped. Silas Morgan and his accomplice were bound and waiting for the sheriff. And Harold Foster, bleeding and broken on the floor of the cabin he had thought to invade, would never hurt anyone again. The weeks following the attack passed in a blur of activity and healing. Sheriff Webb came and went, taking statements and gathering evidence. Dr. Cole visited regularly to check on Clara, who had emerged from the ordeal physically unharmed but emotionally exhausted. The neighbors arrived in a steady stream, bringing food and offers of help in the quiet solidarity that bound frontier communities together. The barn was rebuilt in 3 days. A dozen men from surrounding homesteads showed up at dawn on a cold November morning, their wagons loaded with lumber and tools. By sunset, the structure stood again, fresh pine boards gleaming in the fading light. The women had organized a feast, and everyone ate together in the yard, their breath fogging in the autumn air. Clara watched it all with a sense of wonder that she could not quite name. In Ohio, she had been isolated, locked away from the world by Harold's paranoid control. She had never known what it felt like to be part of something larger than herself. Now she understood. Ruth Caldwell became a constant presence in those difficult days. She arrived each morning with fresh bread or preserves, staying to help Clara with the housework and offering quiet companionship that asked for nothing in return. One afternoon, as they sat together mending clothes by the fire, Ruth set down her needle and looked at Clara with those knowing eyes. You did a brave thing, she said. Standing up to that man, shooting him when he came for you. Clara stared at the fabric in her hands. I do not feel brave, I feel numb. That will pass. Ruth reached over and covered Clara's hand with her own. What you are feeling now is the aftermath. Your body and mind are trying to make sense of what happened. But I want you to remember something. What? You are not a victim anymore. You are a survivor. There is a difference, Abad. Clara thought about those words for a long time after Ruth left that evening. Victim, survivor. She had been the first for so long that she did not know how to be the second. but she was learning. The legal proceedings moved forward with surprising speed. Harold Foster was transported to Ohio under guard, his wounded shoulder bandaged and his wrists in chains. The attack on the Brennan Ranch had provided the final piece of evidence needed to convince authorities that Clara's escape had been justified. More importantly, other witnesses began to come forward. A former servant who had seen the beatings and remained silent out of fear. A neighbor who had heard screams from the Foster house late at night. A doctor who had treated Clara's injuries over the years and looked the other way because Harold paid well for his discretion. The weight of testimony was overwhelming. Harold Foster, the respectable businessman, the pillar of Columbus society, was revealed as the monster he had always been. Sheriff Webb delivered the news personally on a bitter December afternoon. 15 years, he said, standing on the porch with his hat in his hands. That is what the judge gave him. Assault, false imprisonment, conspiracy. He will be an old man before he sees the outside of a cell. Clara received the news with strange calm. She had expected to feel something profound joy or relief or vindication. Instead, she felt only a quiet emptiness, as if a storm had finally passed and left behind nothing but silence. Thank you, she said to Webb, for everything you did. The sheriff nodded. You did most of the heavy lifting yourself, Mrs. Brennan. All I did was make sure the law worked the way it was supposed to. That night, Sam found Clara standing on the porch wrapped in a heavy shawl against the winter cold. The stars were brilliant overhead, scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. How do you feel? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Clara was quiet for a long moment. I thought I would feel happy or relieved, but I just feel empty. Sam understood. He had felt something similar after the war when the fighting finally stopped, and he returned home to find Martha's grave on the hill. The absence of danger did not automatically create peace. It just created space where peace might eventually grow. Give it time, he said. You have been carrying this weight for years. It takes a while to remember how to stand up straight without it. Clara leaned into him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I keep thinking about my mother, she said softly. She never got to see him face justice. She died thinking he would never pay for what he did. Maybe she knows now, Sam said. Wherever she is. Clara looked up at the stars. Maybe. They stood together in the cold silence watching the night, and for the first time since Harold had appeared on their doorstep, Clara felt something other than fear. She felt the faint stirring of hope. Winter settled over Kansas like a heavy blanket. Snow fell in the early days of December, transforming the prairie into an endless expanse of white. The world grew quiet, muffled by the snow, and life on the ranch slowed to a peaceful rhythm. Sam spent his days tending the cattle breaking ice on the water troughs, making sure the animals had enough feed to survive until spring. Clara learned to preserve food for the winter months guided by Ruth's patient instruction. She pickled vegetables, smoked meat, baked bread that filled the cabin with warmth and the smell of yeast. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire. Sam read aloud from the small collection of books he had accumulated over the years, novels and poetry and accounts of exploration in far-off lands. Clara listened mending clothes or knitting content in the simple pleasure of his voice. They talked more now than they had in those first tentative weeks. Sam told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his father who worked in the coal mines, and his mother who died when he was 12. He told her about meeting Martha, about falling in love, about the dreams they had shared of building a life in the West. And he told her about losing her. The winter of '58, he said one night, staring into the flames. She was 7 months pregnant. The fever came through and she was not strong enough to fight it. Neither was the baby. Clara reached for his hand. I buried them on the hill behind the cabin, Sam continued, under the big oak tree. I thought about leaving after that, selling the ranch and going somewhere else, somewhere that did not remind me of her. But I could not do it. This was our dream. Walking away felt like betraying her memory. So you stayed. I stayed and I stopped living, just existing day to day waiting for something I could not name. He looked at Clara, his eyes bright in the firelight. Then your letter came. Clara remembered writing that letter. The desperate hope she had poured into every word, the terror that it would not be enough, the greater terror that it would be, and she would find herself in an even worse situation. I was so afraid, she admitted, coming here, marrying a man I had never met, but I was more afraid of staying. And now Clara thought about the question, about the months that had passed since she arrived in Kansas. the fear and the healing and the violence and the aftermath. And now I am glad I came, she said simply. Now this feels like home. Sam lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. It is home, he said, for both of us. The intimacy between them deepened as winter wore on. Not just physical intimacy, though, that too had grown more comfortable and natural, but emotional intimacy. The kind that comes from sharing fears and hopes in quiet moments in front of the fire. Clara learned to read Sam's silences, to understand what he needed even when he did not have words for it. Sam learned to recognize the signs when Clara was struggling, when the old fears crept back, and he learned how to be present without pushing. They were building something together. Not just a ranch or a household, but a partnership. The kind of relationship Clara had dreamed about as a girl before Harold had taught her that dreams were dangerous. Sometimes she still woke in the night, heart pounding, certain that she had heard footsteps on the porch. Sometimes shadows in the corner of her vision made her flinch. The scars, both visible and invisible, would take years to fully heal. But she was healing. Day by day, moment by moment, she was becoming the woman she was meant to be. The first sign came in late February. Clara woke before dawn, her stomach churning with nausea. She barely made it to the wash basin before she was sick, retching until there was nothing left. Sam was beside her in an instant, his hand cool on her forehead. What is wrong? Should I fetch the doctor? Clara shook her head weakly. I do not think I am sick. Not exactly. It took another week of morning nausea and strange food cravings before she was certain. And even then she waited to tell Sam, wanting to be absolutely sure before she spoke the words aloud. She told him on a quiet evening in early March, when the first hints of spring were beginning to show in the melting snow and the lengthening days. Sam, she said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, I need to tell you something. He looked up from the harness he was mending, concern flickering across his face. What is it? Clara took a deep breath. I am going to have a baby. The harness slipped from Sam's fingers. He stared at her, his expression frozen somewhere between shock and disbelief. A baby, he repeated. In the summer, Dr. Cole thinks, late July or early August. For a long moment, Sam did not move, did not speak. Clara felt a flutter of fear. Perhaps he did not want a child. Perhaps the loss of Martha and their baby had left wounds too deep for him to contemplate fatherhood again. Then Sam was on his feet, crossing the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around until she laughed with surprise. A baby, he said again, but this time his voice was thick with emotion. Clara, a baby. You are happy, she asked, looking up at his face. Happy. Sam set her down and cupped her face in his hands. This is the happiest I have been since I cannot remember when. 10 years. 10 years I thought I would never have a family again. And now you are here and we are going to have a child. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. I was afraid to tell you, she admitted. After what happened with Martha, I thought maybe you would not want to risk it again. Sam's expression softened. I would be lying if I said I was not scared. Losing Martha and the baby nearly destroyed me. But being afraid of losing something is not a good enough reason to refuse to have it in the first place. He kissed her forehead, then her lips gentle and full of promise. We are going to be parents, he said. You and me. A family. Clara wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. A family, she whispered. I never thought I would have that. Well, you have it now, and I am not going anywhere. The news spread quickly through the small community. Ruth was the first to know, of course, and she immediately took charge of preparations with the efficiency of a general marshaling troops. You will need baby clothes, she announced, arriving at the cabin with a basket full of fabric, and a cradle, and blankets, and about 100 other things that I will make a list of. Sam built the cradle himself, working in the evenings after his ranch chores were done. He crafted it from oak, the same wood he had used for the bed, and carved small flowers around the edges with a skill that surprised Clara. I did not know you could do that, she said, watching him work. My father taught me. He made furniture to sell before the mines took his health. Sam ran his hand over the smooth wood. I made a cradle for Martha, too. It is still in the barn somewhere. I could not bring myself to look at it after she died. Clara touched his arm gently. We do not have to use it. No, Sam shook his head. I think I would like to. It feels right somehow, giving it a second chance the way you gave me one. The cradle was brought out cleaned and placed beside the new one in the small room Sam had added to the cabin over the winter. Two cradles, one old and one new, waiting for the child that would fill them both with new life. Spring came to Kansas in a rush of green and gold. The snow melted, the creeks swelled with runoff, and wildflowers erupted across the prairie in waves of color. Clara's belly grew round beneath her dress, and she moved through her days with a new kind of contentment. There were hard moments, of course. The pregnancy brought fatigue and discomfort, and sometimes the old fears crept back in the dark hours of the night. But Sam was always there, steady and patient, ready to hold her when she needed holding and give her space when she needed that instead. Ruth became a constant presence, teaching Clara everything she would need to know about childbirth and infant care. Ezra built a rocking chair for the baby's room, presenting it with gruff embarrassment and a muttered comment about having nothing better to do with his time. The community embraced them. Neighbors who had once viewed Sam as a strange, solitary figure now stopped by regularly, bringing gifts and good wishes. Clara, who had spent so many years isolated and alone, found herself surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. The news from Ohio arrived in August, just weeks before Clara was due to give birth. Sheriff Webb rode out to the ranch on a humid afternoon, his face unreadable as he dismounted and walked up to the porch where Clara sat fanning herself in the heat. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, removing his hat, "I have news about Harold Foster." Clara's hands stilled on the fan. "What kind of news?" "He is dead." The words hung in the heavy air. Clara stared at Webb, waiting for more. "Stabbed in prison about 2 weeks ago. Some dispute with another inmate. He died before they could get a doctor to him." Clara waited for something to happen inside her, some rush of emotion, relief or satisfaction or even grief. But there was only that same strange emptiness she had felt when she learned of his conviction. "I see," she said finally. "Thank you for telling me." Webb nodded. "I thought you would want to know, so you would not have to wonder anymore." After he left, Clara sat on the porch for a long time, one hand resting on her swollen belly. Harold Foster was dead. The man who had haunted her nightmares for 10 years, the monster who had beaten her and controlled her and made her feel worthless, was gone forever. He would never hurt anyone again. She waited to feel something. Joy, perhaps, or vindication. But all she felt was a quiet certainty that she had already won. She had won the moment she stepped off that stagecoach in Abilene. She had won when she chose to trust Sam instead of running. She had won when she stood in the doorway of her home and fired the shot that ended Harold's power over her forever. His death was not the end of her story. It was barely a footnote. Sam found her there when he came in from the fields, still sitting on the porch, still staring at the horizon. "Clara, what is wrong?" She looked up at him, this man who had given her everything, and smiled. "Harold is dead, killed in prison." Sam sat down beside her, searching her face. "How do you feel?" "I feel like it does not matter anymore. Like he stopped mattering a long time ago." She took his hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was kicking. "This is what matters now. You and me and our child. Harold Foster is the past. This is the future." Sam leaned over and kissed her softly. "I love you," he said. "Have I told you that lately?" "Only about a dozen times today." "Then I am falling behind." That night, Clara stood on the porch again, looking east toward Ohio, toward the grave where her mother lay and the prison where Harold Foster had met his end. "Mama," she whispered to the wind, "I made it. I survived. And I am going to live. I am going to be happy." The wind carried her words away across the prairie, and Clara felt the last chains of her past finally fall away. She was free. The baby came on a sweltering July afternoon when the Kansas sun blazed overhead and the air hung thick and still. Clara had been having pain since dawn, but she had not told Sam until the contractions grew too strong to hide. Then everything happened very quickly. Sam rode to fetch Dr. Cole while Ruth, who had been visiting that afternoon by fortunate coincidence, took charge of preparations. The labor was long and difficult. 12 hours of pain that came in waves, each one stronger than the last. Clara clung to Ruth's hand, to the bedposts, to anything that could anchor her against the force of her own body trying to turn itself inside out. Sam paced outside on the porch, Ezra beside him. He could hear Clara's cries through the walls, and each sound was a knife twisting in his chest. "She is going to be all right," Ezra said, though his own face was pale. Ruth knows what she is doing, so does the doc. Sam nodded, but he could not speak. All he could think about was Martha. Martha in this same bed fighting the same battle. Martha losing. He had buried one wife. He could not bear to bury another. The hours crawled past. The sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening across the yard. Sam wore a path in the porch, boards back and forth, listening and waiting and praying to a God he had not spoken to in years. And then near sunset, when the western sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson, a new sound split the air. A baby's cry. Sam froze. The cry came again, thin and strong, the unmistakable wail of a newborn announcing its arrival in the world. The door opened and Ruth appeared, her face exhausted but beaming. "You have a daughter," she said, "and Clara is fine. They are both fine." Sam pushed past her into the cabin. Clara lay in the bed, pale and drenched with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. "Come meet her," Clara said weakly. Sam approached the bed as if walking through a dream. He sat down carefully beside Clara and looked at the tiny face peering out from the blankets. The baby had Clara's coloring pink skin and a dusting of brown hair. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her little fists waving in the air. She was the most beautiful thing Sam had ever seen. "She is perfect," he whispered. "I want to name her Lily," Clara said, "after my mother." Sam touched the baby's cheek with one trembling finger. "Lily, that is a good name." "Lily Brennan." Clara looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Our daughter." Sam bent down and kissed Clara's forehead, then the baby's. "Our daughter," he repeated. "Our family." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, of learning to care for a tiny human who seemed to need something every minute of the day. Lily was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs that she exercised frequently. She woke at all hours demanding to be fed, or changed, or simply held. Sam, who had faced cannon fire without flinching, found himself completely helpless before his infant daughter's cries. "She is a tiny tyrant," he complained one morning, dark circles under his eyes, Lily wailing in his arms. "The most fearsome enemy I have ever encountered." Clara laughed from the bed where she was trying to catch a few minutes of rest. "And yet you have completely surrendered." "Completely," Sam agreed, rocking Lily with the desperate hope that she might just maybe fall asleep. "She has conquered me utterly." But beneath the exhaustion and the chaos, there was joy. Real joy, the kind Sam had thought he would never feel again after Martha died. Every time Lily wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb, every time she looked up at him, with those unfocused newborn eyes, he felt something crack open in his chest. Ruth came every day helping with the baby and teaching Clara the thousand small skills that motherhood required. Ezra built a rocking chair for the nursery and presented it with his usual gruff demeanor, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. The community continued to rally around them. Neighbors brought food and baby clothes, stopping by to coo over Lily and offer advice. The isolation that had defined Sam's life for so long was gone, replaced by the warm embrace of people who cared. And Clara. Clara blossomed into motherhood as if she had been waiting for it her whole life. The fear that had haunted her was fading now, replaced by a fierce, protective love that amazed Sam with its intensity. "I will never let anyone hurt her," Clara said one night, watching Lily sleep in her cradle. "Never. She will grow up knowing that she is loved and safe and valued." "She will," Sam agreed, "because she has you for a mother." Clara looked at him and there was something new in her eyes. Confidence. Strength. The quiet certainty of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged whole on the other side. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for saving me." Sam shook his head. "You saved yourself, Clara. You got on that stagecoach. You chose to come here. You chose to stow and to heal and to fight back. All I did was give you a place to land. You gave me more than that." Clara rose from the chair and crossed to where he stood. "You gave me a reason to believe that not all men are monsters, that love does not have to hurt, that I could be something other than a victim." She reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of the scar on his cheek. "You gave me back my life," she said, "and I am going to spend the rest of it making sure Lily knows what a good man looks like." Sam pulled her into his arms and held her close. "We saved each other," he said into her hair. "That is the truth of it." "I like that better," Claire admitted. "It sounds more equal." "It is more equal. We are partners, remember. That is what I promised you on our wedding night. Clara laughed softly. I remember. I thought you were lying. I thought it was too good to be true. And now she pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. Now I know it is true, and I know I am the luckiest woman in Kansas. The months passed and Lily grew. She learned to smile, to laugh, to reach for things that caught her attention. She spoke her first word, Papa, at 8 months old, and Sam's heart nearly burst with pride. Clara grew too, not physically, but in ways that were harder to measure. The flinching stopped entirely. The nightmares faded. She walked through the world with her head held high, no longer watching shadows for threats that were not coming. She learned to ride Daisy with confidence, galloping across the prairie with Lily strapped to her chest. She learned to shoot well enough that Sam trusted her to handle any trouble that might arise. She learned to trust herself, which was perhaps the hardest lesson of all. The ranch prospered. Sam hired 2 seasonal workers to help with the cattle and talked about expanding the operation. He drew up plans for a larger house, one with separate bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and began setting aside money to make it a reality. For Lily, he said when he showed Clara the drawings, and for any brothers or sisters that might come along. Clara smiled. You are getting ahead of yourself. Am I? Sam raised an eyebrow, because I seem to recall some conversations on that subject recently. Clara blushed, but she did not deny it. They had been talking about the future more and more lately, about more children, about growing the ranch, about the life they were building together. It felt strange to plan for the future. For so long, Clara had lived day to day, never knowing if tomorrow would bring another beating or another humiliation. The idea that she could look ahead, could make plans and expect them to come true was still something she was learning to accept. But she was learning. Every day she was learning. On a warm autumn evening when Lily was just over a year old and the Kansas sky was painted with sunset colors, Clara and Sam sat together on the porch of their cabin. Lily was inside sleeping in her cradle, worn out from a day of toddling around the yard and getting into everything she could reach. Ruth and Ezra had gone home after dinner, and the ranch was quiet, peaceful, suffused with the golden light of the dying day. Do you remember our wedding night? Clara asked. Sam looked at her, surprised by the question. Of course I do. I said something to you when you tried to touch me. Sam nodded slowly. You said it hurts. You said it was your first time. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. I understand now, she said. What I meant, even if I did not know it then. What do you mean? Clara turned to face him, and there was peace in her eyes, a deep, settled peace that had taken years to grow. That night was not the first time something hurt me. I had been hurting for 5 years, but it was the first time I said it out loud, the first time I admitted to someone else that I was in pain. She took his hand. And you stopped. You heard me say I was hurting, and you stopped. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many times I had begged Harold to stop, and he just kept going? Sam felt his throat tighten. That was the first time, Clara continued, the first time anyone listened when I said I was in pain. The first time anyone cared. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Sam had ever seen. And now, she said, now it is the first time for a lot of things. First time I have felt safe. First time I have felt loved. First time I have felt like my life belongs to me and not to someone else. She looked out at the prairie, at the endless expanse of gold and green that was stretching toward the horizon. It hurts is what I said, but that was then. Now for the first time in my life, I do not hurt anymore. Sam pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, feeling her heart beat against his chest. I love you, he said. Have I told you that today? Only about 100 times. Then I am still falling behind. They sat together on the porch, watching the sunset over Kansas, and the past felt very far away. Time moved on as it always does. Lily learned to walk, then to run, then to climb everything in sight. She grew tall and strong with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She learned to read at 5, to write at 6, to shoot at 7. Clara insisted on that last one. Every woman should know how to protect herself, she told Sam. Lily will never be helpless. I will make sure of it. Sam did not argue. He had seen what helplessness had done to Clara, and he would do anything to spare his daughter that fate. The ranch continued to grow. Sam built the new house he had planned, a proper farmhouse with 4 bedrooms and a big kitchen where Ruth could teach Clara to cook. They added more land, more cattle, more opportunities for the future. Clara gave birth to two more children, a boy they named Robert after Clara's father, who had died when she was 8, and then a girl they named Ruth after the woman who had become Clara's second mother. The cabin that had once been so quiet was now filled with the sounds of children laughing, arguing, playing. Ruth Caldwell died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1878. She was 68 years old, and she had spent her final years surrounded by the family she had helped create. Clara wept for a week, and then she picked herself up and kept going, because that was what Ruth would have wanted. Ezra followed his wife 6 months later, simply failing to wake up one morning. Sam buried him next to Ruth in the small cemetery behind the church in Abilene, and then he came home and held Clara while she cried again. "They were the closest thing to parents I have ever known," Clara said, "the only ones who ever really cared." "They would be so proud of you," Sam replied, "of the woman you have become." Life went on. It always does. There were good years and hard years, droughts and floods, booms and busts. But through it all, Sam and Clara remained together, partners in every sense of the word. When Lily was grown, she married a young lawyer from Topeka who treated her with the respect and kindness that Clara had insisted upon. Robert took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving to have a natural gift for the work. Little Ruth, who turned out to have a gift for learning, went east to attend college, something that would have been unimaginable in Clara's youth. And Clara had to become something she never thought she would be, a pillar of the community, a woman people looked up to, a grandmother when Lily's first child arrived in 1889. One evening when they were both growing old, but not yet ancient, Clara and Sam sat together on the porch of the big house, watching the sunset over Kansas. "We did all right," Sam said, "you and me." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "We did more than all right. We built a life. From nothing. From less than nothing. From broken pieces and borrowed hope." Sam took her hand, the same hand he had held on their wedding night, now weathered and lined with age but still strong. "If I could go back," he said, "to the day I placed that advertisement in the newspaper, I would not change a thing. Not a single thing." "Well," Sam pretended to think about it, "I might have been a little more gentle that first night. I was an idiot trying to touch you before you were ready." Clara laughed. "You were an idiot, but you learned." "I had a good teacher." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors fade from the sky. "Do you ever think about him?" Sam asked eventually. "About Harold?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "not with fear anymore, just wondering how someone could be so cruel and never see it in themselves. Some men are just broken. Maybe, or maybe they break themselves one choice at a time until there is nothing left but the monster." Clara shook her head. "It does not matter anymore. He is dead and gone, and we are here. That is the only thing that counts." The stars were coming out now, scattered across the darkening sky. "I used to be afraid of the dark," Clara said. "Did I ever tell you that for years after I came to Kansas, I could not sleep without a lamp burning? The dark reminded me of that house in Ohio, of all the nights I spent waiting for his footsteps on the stairs. And now," Clara looked up at the stars, "now I love the dark, because it means another day is over, another day that I spent safe and free and loved." She smiled. "And because I know that no matter how dark it gets, the sunrise always comes." Sam kissed the top of her head. "That should be the title of your life story," he said. "Sunrise always comes, eh? Too optimistic." Clara laughed. "Maybe just scars and sunrise, because you cannot have one without the other." "That is true enough." They watched the last light fade from the western horizon, and the night settled around them like a comfortable blanket. "Thank you," Clara said. "For what?" "For answering my letter, for giving me a chance, for being patient when I was broken and scared and did not know how to be anything else." Sam squeezed her hand. "Thank you for writing it, for trusting a stranger with your life, for letting me be part of your healing." Clara turned to look at him, this man who had shared her life for so many years, and she felt her heart swell with something too big for words. "We saved each other," she said. "That is what you told me once. It is still true. It will always be true." The stars wheeled overhead and the wind whispered through the prairie grass, and Sam and Clara Brennan sat together on the porch of the home they had built from nothing. And in the distance on the eastern horizon there was the faintest hint of light, the promise of another sunrise. So that is the story of Sam and Clara Brennan, a rancher who had lost hope and a mail-order bride who had lost everything. Two broken people who found each other across hundreds of miles and discovered that healing was possible after all. If you are listening to this story, I want you to think about something. Clara had every reason to give up. 5 years of abuse, 5 years of being told she was worthless, 5 years of pain and fear and isolation. But she did not give up. She got on that stagecoach. She took a chance on a stranger. She chose to heal even when healing seemed impossible. And because of that choice, she built a life she never thought she could have. A husband who loved her, children who adored her, a community that respected her. It hurts is what she said that first night. This is my first time. But that pain was not the end of her story. It was the beginning. The first time she was heard. The first time she was believed. The first time someone stopped when she said stop. And from that moment, everything changed. If this story has touched something in you, if you have ever had to start over from nothing, if you have ever had to find the courage to trust again after someone broke you, I want you to know that you are not alone. We are all a little bit like Clara and Sam. We all carry scars. We all have nights when the darkness feels like it will never end. But the scars do not define us. What defines us is what we do next, who we choose to become. So if you are carrying something heavy tonight, if you are wondering if the pain will ever stop, I want you to remember this. The sunrise always comes. No matter how long the night, no matter how dark it gets, the light will return. And maybe, just maybe, there is someone out there waiting to help you find it. Thank you for listening, my friends. If this story meant something to you, tap that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? Pour yourself something warm, take a deep breath, and remember that tomorrow is another chance to start again. Until next time, keep your heart open and your courage strong. Because sometimes, even in the wildest and most broken places, people still find their way home.